Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. And thank you, Shirley, for all the work and your vision in getting all this off the ground. I'm going to try to explain why am I here later, but I'm just going to start at the moment because we've talked about test anxiety. We all get anxious. Actually, I get anxious. Things like driving tests or music tests, we all get test anxiety. But I think we should all start by you doing a bit of maths, and we're going to have a maths test, and you're not to giggle and pretend not to do it. I want a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm going to give you 5 seconds to answer. And actually, because I did think walking in, I should collect in your responses, and then I could write a paper in a learned journal about all these people coming to the launch of the Maths Anxiety Trust and look at their responses. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to get your piece of paper and your pencil, because we've only got 5 seconds. I've got my mobile phone especially here. And actually, I'm going to be asking you to do some maths every now and again during my presentation. But, OK, let's go. 5 seconds. This is a test. Can you read it? Can you read it? Oh. Well, the first question is, write down a large number. The second is, what is the difference between 7 and 10? What is an odd number? If John runs a mile in 7 minutes, how long does it take him to run 20 miles? And on a ship, there are 35 horses and 10 ducks. What is the age of the captain? Now, most of these, if you've been thinking at all about maths, you'll know that there's a trick in all of these. In terms of we have to interpret each question when we write down a large number. We don't mean write down a huge numeral. We need whatever. But the last one is particularly interesting, and there have been a lot of papers about that. And because we always think that we should write something. Now, while you're still listening, what's 8 times 7? I don't know what you've all said, but actually, if you take some extracts from a UK national newspaper, it was announced that children will have to learn times tables by heart in a return to traditional maths teaching in primary schools, ordered by the government yesterday. And that was January 1998. It wasn't recently. So this was the launch of the National Numeracy Strategy. And you may remember the minister was asked, he was launching this to all the radio and all the media, and he was like, what is 8 times 7? Do you remember this? And he said, I think it's 54. And I think it was the end of his career. Poor old Stephen Byers. And actually, it's quite interesting. And I'm very sad the politician isn't here now, because I actually think because of this, ministers never answer the question now. Over and over again, they're asked. Even Nick Gibb was asked quite recently. He said, I know the answer, but I'm not saying. And this is something about 8 times 7. If you only learnt it by heart and you've got pressure, your mind goes blank. But it was just interesting, in reading this cutting again, Mr. Byers says, oh, dear, help. And he says, as Secretary of State, I should know this, and I'll be spending 45 minutes tomorrow going through my tables. And I thought, Johnny, well, I hope he doesn't. That's a real waste of his time. But there is a certain pressure in terms of being asked number facts very fast. I'm sure that Stephen Byers, if he was given longer, he could work out how to do it, whether he does 7 sevens and then add another one or whatever. Anyway, now I'm just going to mention a bit of pupils' views. It's my research from way back. In fact, my PhD was in 1980, so how long ago was that? I'm not going to ask you. But the thing about it, I thank you for inviting me, because I actually got my PhD off my shelf, which is about this thick. It was printed, it was a dot matrix, just typewriter. It was a nightmare. But it was interesting looking back on it and looking back at some of the literature that informed my research that has now come back into vogue. We looked at the explanations of maths anxiety, some of which Margaret has mentioned. First of all, the discipline itself, this symbolic, right, wrong, that sort of stuff. Past experiences in maths, concept of ability, feeling you're no good. And obviously, again, as Margaret said, how maths was taught. We can all remember our wonderful teacher and our really awful teacher who stood us in the corner and made us feel humble and humiliated. So those are the sorts of things about maths anxiety. But I wasn't looking for maths anxiety. By the way, I was doing it at Chelsea College, which then became King's, where Margaret was. asked the students to just tell me stories about good and bad learning experiences. And actually, I got 281 stories, I coded them all, and I had punch cards. Do you remember that? You passed the punch cards into the machine. Anyway, more stories about maths than anything else. No mention of content. I mean, actually, Margaret said in her survey, they mentioned fractions, but just get a name of something, but not really what they were doing, which I thought was really rather poor. And lots of focus on self, about how they felt, and lots of stories about shame, anxiety, and helplessness. And I want to just read one that I have here, just briefly, because I think why I indulge myself in doing this research, in a way, although I didn't do more work on maths anxiety explicitly, it did affect a lot of what I try to do professionally, because I didn't realise, till listening to these kids, what an awful time a lot of them had. Because when you're like me, a lot of you quite enjoy maths and you did quite well, you didn't realise the really humiliating and panic that a lot of kids had. So I did try in my future work to do things a bit better in my teaching, and also using computers to try and make the feedback come not only from the teacher who just said wrong. So let me just read a bit of the story. I was the interviewer. I say to this kid, can you describe me anything, a time that was really good or bad? Well, he said, there is maths. It could have been any subject. I always find maths hard. That's why I switched from O-level to CSE. This shows how long ago it was. And I found O-level too hard. Maths is my weakest subject and I'm useless at it. So can you think of telling me a time which sounds as particularly bad? This was the methodology I was using. Well, there is maths all this year. I just cannot do it. I can't remember what it was even, but it should all be easy, but I find it hard and it's all this easy stuff. I'm trying to do my homework at home like it's always the same. I keep trying and nothing comes out. I feel so tight inside, I want to explode. You know, sick and sweating and shaking. The longer I sit there, the worse it gets. I feel I ought to give up. I'm in such a state. Yeah, I'm just useless at maths. While I'm sitting there, I know will not be able to do it. Once it was straight lines and gradients and things. It was terrible. I didn't have a clue. I just felt sick. And then in the end, I just gave up. There's nothing else I could do. And there are stories like that. You think, well, why is it that's so difficult in our subject, and what can we do about it? So I'm just going to ask you one other question. So another mathsy question, just very quickly. A bat and a ball costs 110p. The bat costs 100p. 100p more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Quick, you all know? I don't know whether to ask you. But this is one of these, it's a well-known puzzle, a well-known problem, because often you say 10p, because that sort of jumps out the I won't humiliate you by asking you who said that, or who might have thought that, but you have to actually think about it and then reflect. But then doing that too, you might have recognised the emotional side. Now, what I'm going to do now, as I said, I did this work a long time ago for my PhD, and since then I haven't really looked at it explicitly. And then what I did to prepare for this evening, I went back over a lot of the work I have done, and I picked out the bits that I never really analysed, because I was looking at students' understanding of X, or trying to solve a puzzle. And then actually, if you look quite carefully at what was going on, you can see ripples of this maths anxiety around. So I'm going to, instead of showing you, show you the bit of the research, because I have to, but I want really to look at the bit that might, where the kid or the student or the adult was expressing maths anxiety. This is part of a longitudinal proof survey I did with Deep on Koopman. And this, I don't know if you can see that, it's a very well-known sort of task. These were year 10, and we asked this actually every year 8, 9 and 10. It's a longitudinal, and we follow them. A lot of them didn't get any better at this task, which was a bit sad. But just reading it, in case you can't see it, Lisa has some white tiles and some grey tiles. They are all the same size. She makes a row of white tiles. There it is. She surrounds the white tiles by a single layer of grey tiles. There it is. How many grey tiles does she need to surround a row of 60 white tiles? She has 6, and she's surrounded with grey tiles, and then she's asked for 60. You might like just think about that. So what might you answer? And then the next question, you might want to show you've got your answer. But for the older children, they wanted to answer express in algebra. So instead of 6 tiles or 60 tiles, you have n tiles, and you surround it by grey tiles. I don't know what you think your answer would be. Anyway, it's quite interesting. This is a year 10 student. Now, these were high-performing, keen students. The reason for doing the high-performing, we were looking at students who might well go on to study maths post-16. And this, I just want you to look at now we don't know what exactly that boy, it was a boy, was thinking as he do it, but you could almost see the indecision and the worry. Look at the top there, how many times he's scribbled it out. He's tried it, put in 180, put in 126, scribbled out 180, scribbled out 126. Oh my God, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Scrubbed it all out. And then at the end, when you have to put it in n, he's put 4n, and then he's got to scribble that out and put 2n plus 6. Now, as it happened, well, it's not as it happened, I chose this one because I interviewed them. Dietmar and I used to go and interview some of the students if we thought the scripts looked interesting. And also, if they made progress over the years of the project. I didn't realise I pointed there. This is Greg. I remember Greg as if it was yesterday. He was a very confident young man. He wanted to be a musician. He was in a band. So he wasn't one of these anxious sort of poor little thing. So I showed him his scripts and I said, just tell me about your learning and what you were thinking about. He said, well, first I worked it all out as if all the 60 white tiles were in one straight line. So there are 60 white tiles, so you sort of times by 10, and then there are 18 grey tiles around it, so I just times that by 10 to get 180 grey tiles. Well, that actually coded as, a certain sort of response. Wrong, by the way, but we got a lot of those. But the bit I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus what he said later. And then when you came to do it, then you've got 2n plus 6, I say. I randomly guessed that, he said. I'm rubbish at that kind of thing, he said, trying to get me off his back. And he said, I said, funnily enough, that's absolutely right. And he said, you're joking. But the interesting thing is in terms of maths anxiety, he wasn't your typical maths anxiety, but he didn't really know what was right, what was not right, and he was getting, I'm useless at it anyway. And in the students overall, we found there was little ownership over the answers, little ownership or conviction. They didn't know what it was to adopt a mathematical way of thinking, and they often said, like Greg, maybe to get the interviewer off their back, I'm no good. Right, I'm going to fast forward a bit, and I'm going to show you a bit of fun and games. Many of you would have seen this clip. It's a television program I did a long time ago, but instead of showing you the puzzle, which was all about trying to popularise maths and showing interesting maths problems and getting people to, enjoy maths a little bit, not be afraid, do it at home with their family, and all. We had got them to send in their own puzzles. Everybody, the studio audience, and although a lot of people watching, 10,000 watching, we'd all have to think what the answer was. And my job was always to show if you only think mathematically, everything would be fine. But I'm not going to show my bit. I'm just going to show Rob setting the puzzle. I'd like you to think what you would say. And I want you to then look at the reactions of some of the people who were interviewed by Rob.
Flies from point A to point B, right? And then it turns round and flies back again, and that's called a round trip. Okay, no problem. Now, normally it is a very calm day, but one day there is a wind blowing in the direction of A to B, okay? So now it does the round trip, and on the way A to B, it's sort of gone with the wind, as it were, and then B to A, it comes back against it. Now, here is the puzzle, and I want all the studio audience to think about this. On the day when the wind is blowing from A to B, does the round trip take the same amount of time as on a calm day, or more time or less time? So what I want you to do is to tell me by holding up a card, M for more time, S for the same, L for less time. And here's the question again. When the wind is blowing from A to B, does the round trip, A to B and back from B to A, does that round trip take more time, less time, or the same amount of time as on a calm day. So can you vote now by showing me your card now?
Vote. What do you think?
Okay, okay. Gus, can I ask you first of all, why do you think it takes the same amount of time when the wind is blowing?
Because it'll go from A to B quicker,
Yeah.
but it will take longer to go from B to A.
Right.
Mathematically, it'll take the same time.
Mathematically, it'll take the same time. That's a word we like on this programme. Caroline?
I think the same.
I think the same. You think the same? It sort of swings and roundabouts, is it? It loses on the swings, gains on the roundabouts. Okay, how are you feeling, Audrey? Are you feeling a little bit lonely here?
Yes, yeah.
Now, you've got M.
More
meaning,
time.
Tell me why you think it might take more time.
Oh, I'm not very clever, but the wind would be holding it back.
Okay,
I don't want to go on anymore, but I have looked at that clip a few times. You have to contrast the gut. Actually, most people think it's the same, the swings and roundabouts. But Audrey is in fact correct. But I want to just look. I looked again at her whole body language. He was quite confident. It's quite a big thing, actually, saying this on television, with Rob with it, dancing about and saying, "What do you think?" I mean, it's enough to put anybody off. I just transcribed what she said. She said, "More time." She looked quite confident. And she said, "I'm not very clever." And she said, "But the wind will be holding it back." And then she laughed and hid behind her hands, which is a sign of sort of, well, I'm not really very good. In fact, the wind will be holding it back is sort of right. That's exactly why it takes more time. Well, I want to say we're all anxious. Some people in this room have done more maths, but I still am very anxious when I'm confronted with maths. And there is this syndrome about feeling shown up, and we're anxious whether we're going to be good enough. And there is this syndrome, I suppose I'm like now, I'm a bit of an imposter syndrome. I don't really know about maths anxiety very much. But when you're doing maths, you always think you're going to get found out. You're supposed to know about these things. Now, we know as teachers, we can help classrooms feel better about it. So you don't pounce on people and say, what's the answer? You give them a chance, discuss it, write it down, draw a picture, take a deep breath, think of it a different way. So there are lots of things you can do to ease the situation. But there is this thing about the imposter syndrome. And one thing that I do want to tell you about is not just people who aren't very good at maths. Audrey said, "I'm no good at maths." And she, after all, just turned up at the studio audience just to have a bit of fun. But it's also for people who are very good at maths. And I want to just mention Mariam Mazzacani. I don't know if you know Mariam Mazzacani. She was the first woman to be awarded the Fields Medal, which is the top mathematics prize. Incredible feat. She was the first woman. We had men over and over again. Here was the first woman. And I just want to mention a little about Miriam, because I read a little bit about her history. And she talked about her maths. The first she didn't do very well in maths when she was a kid in school. Her teacher did not think she was very talented. Later, teachers were more encouraging, and she began to excel. Then a dedicated head teacher. It's interesting looking at this trajectory. A dedicated head teacher said, well, the IMO, which is the International Maths Olympiad, she decided she wanted to get some girls to do it, and Mariam made the national team. She won the gold medal in 1995, and with a perfect score. But then she said, later, she said, in retrospect, I see that I was completely clueless. Now, this is so crazy, because clearly she wasn't completely clueless. She was absolutely fantastic, one of the best mathematicians we've ever had. But there is this thing that wherever you go, you always think that you're going to get found out. And I do have to say that, in fact, very sadly, she died in 2017, only at the age of 40, and a brilliant mathematician. I was going to do some more, but I think I will stop. I've got some more clips. I'll just tell you what I was going to show. We did, Richard Noss and I and various other people did a research project called Techno-Mathematical Literacies in the Workplace, where we actually went into different workplaces and trying to find out what the maths was being used in these workplaces. And over again, there was complete avoidance. Either they don't do any maths, we don't do any maths. So we watched them, and some of them were doing quite incredibly sophisticated maths. But some of them really were completely anxious about that. And I want to, if I'm allowed to, because what we did was we devised some, I was going to set you some maths problems, but I haven't got time. So I just, There you are, you're all relieved. It's a bit of statistic. A bit of statistics, that would have upset you all, wouldn't it? So I won't do that. So we devised a little app. We were very proud of our app, actually, because instead of having algebra and calculation, it made it visual. And this guy is the team leader. He's the team leader of the shop floor, who actually trained the men on the shop floor to use this. And it was all standard deviations and means and squiggles and X bars and God knows what else. But they could get it if it was introduced in a different way. Just pause. Just listen to this man. He was the boss of a huge...
In that I think the projects are absolutely excellent. The work that's gone into this has been outstanding. And I think there's one part of this that goes a bit beyond the mathematical side, which has been the focus. That's been sort of the soft side of what the end user gains, the empowerment that the end user has, the knowledge that the person has it when all is said and done, the job satisfaction that the operators now have, say, at Sealed Air. So I think that's really one of the great parts of this entire project and all the work that's gone into this.
So I just thought he just made this as an aside at the end of our project presentation. We hadn't talked about emotions or anxiety at all, but he just said you have to sometimes go beyond the mathematical side and really take the ideas of empowerment and satisfaction and feeling good about yourself really seriously. So that's what I hope the Trust will do. Thank you very much.